we're with Malcolm Gladwell, and you were just brought up faith, and nobody who is talking about your book in the mainstream media is mentioning the element. You say that there are three things. It's faith, courage, and determination.
Yeah.
Nobody's talking about faith.
It's an odd thing. I mean, this book began as I just wanted, in the manner of my previous books, to do this kind of, use a lot of social science, work through theories, tell some stories about the fact that disadvantages are often advantageous and advantages can be... But by the end of the book, I realized that what I really wanted to talk about was faith, was about the weapons of the Spirit.
Are you a spiritual guy?
I am. Well, it's funny. This is also part of it. I come from a profoundly religious background, had drifted away, and with this book, I am now coming back.
I was really, I wanted to know that. I mean, just looking at David and Goliath, and then just reading just the opening chapter is riddled with. I mean, you can tell that you at least had done your homework, but it's not. This is not written. I mean, I don't know you. I don't know where you stand on anything, and I'm not going to ask you where you stand on anything. But I'm reading this, and I'm like, I could have written this. You're not the guy. I don't know who you're supposed to be, but you're not the guy I think some people expect when they read this, because you can tell you have deeper spiritual well.
Well, there's two things. There were two things doing this book that brought that to the fore. One was, I have a chapter where I talk about this little town in the mountains of France. During this, it was a bunch of Huguenots, a dissident Protestant sect in a very Catholic country, up in the mountains. During the Second World War, they decided they were going to harbor any Jewish refugees that came to their door, and Jewish refugees came by the thousands. They took them in, and they told the Nazis, "We're taking them in. If you want to come and get them, we're not going to give them to you. We don't care what you do to us." It's this extraordinary story, and if you read into it, they had nothing. They had no resources, no weapons. They refused to lie, so they weren't using deceit. All they had was their faith, and that was enough. They felt that their faith was every bit the match for whatever the Nazis threw at them. And you cannot read, I don't care if you are the most dyed-in-the-wool atheist, you cannot read that story and not come away with a renewed appreciation for the power that faith gives people.
See, I think that's what people miss, though, about what built us in the first place as a country, is that we were people of faith. Some people used faith to, condone slavery. Slavery was stopped by people of faith. That's what's made us unique. That's what makes America, because once you have faith, you either go manifest destiny, which is slaughter everybody because God tells me to, and you go down that awful road, or you go down this road of I can change the world, I can help people, and you stand and you just keep standing. That's what we've always been, and there seems to be this giant erasing of faith. I mean, I don't know what, I don't know if you have an honest desire to fix things, why you would discourage people from having faith in something, unless it's to kill people.
The other, the interesting part of this as well, though, is I think sometimes people of faith don't always understand how powerful their faith makes them. I mean, that's what's, I was telling that story about the village in France. There were lots of committed Christians in France who didn't have the courage to go up against the Nazis because they thought they were at a hopeless disadvantage. It was just, what's fascinating to me about that story is, it's just this little group in the mountain who understand, whoa, armed with, the Spirit of the Lord, we actually are, we can more than hold our own against a bunch of guys with tanks and... and that's a kind of, it's so rare that you see people who appreciate, and that's what, in the original story of David and Goliath, what David understands, that no one else in the Israelite army understands, is that, and I tell that story at the beginning of my book in this sort of new kind of fun way.
Really good way.
But part of it is, so I mean, I talk about how the sling is actually really, really superior technology. It's the most devastating weapon. In fact, the rock fire from David's sling, I had a ballistics expert in the Israeli Defense Force explain this to me. The rock from David's sling is coming with the stopping power equivalent to a .45 caliber handgun. This is not a child's toy, right? David is like, well, but David understands that with superior technology and the Spirit of the Lord, I'm not the underdog, right? David does not think, we've been telling that story as if he's this incredible long shot. He's not the long shot. I mean, with those two things on his side, he's the favorite, isn't he? I mean, that's how I read that story. And I think I think...
How do you write for the New Yorker? I'm just looking at you, just listening to you, thinking, I've not heard a New York writer ever say that to me. Ever. I mean, I have a lot of Christian friends. I have a lot of pastor friends who don't have that understanding of David and Goliath.
I should introduce you to some of my Mennonite pastor friends who would tell you this. But no, I don't think... How am I? Well, you know, there's more. You'd be surprised. Beneath the surface of places like the New Yorker, there's a lot more diversity than you think. And remember, until I wrote this book was a weird journey for me, you know? All of these things, I came back to all of these issues that I wouldn't have said this 3 years ago either. It's funny, you've written many books, you know this. You start somewhere, and you think you know where you're going to end up, and you don't end up there.
I'll tell you, I just, Srini Rao was just on, and I wrote him a letter, and he published it. And it's, I guess, taken people by surprise. And I said, in the letter, I said, you know, the person that I was when I started this particular phase of my life in 2000, and talk radio and everything else, I was no longer that person when I was at Fox at the top. I had hit a ceiling where I felt like I was all kind of crouched over, and what the world either wanted or hated, I was no longer that anymore.
Yeah,
I wasn't that guy anymore. And so you have to decide, do I continue a journey, or am I happy with who I am? So if you don't change, you're dead or dead inside.
Yeah, yeah.
Back in a minute. So, is everybody capable of being great?
Well, it depends on your definition of greatness. If we use the conventional definition, no. But if we use, to my mind, a better definition is everyone capable of doing something unexpected beyond what
they're doing?
They're doing or what society thought they were capable of. I would say absolutely. And that's really what the stories I tell in this book are, all attempts to understand people who didn't settle for the hand they were dealt, who refused. Like, you know, I tell this story of I was mentioning that cancer doctor who had that appalling childhood, or the little village up in the mountains in France. These are all people who weren't given much conventionally, but refused to let that stop them from achieving something else. And that's the spirit I'm trying to
You're tired,
understand.
You're poor, you're huddled masses.
Yes.
Are the ones. Experts now, I mean, everything that has made us is now being, it's all about the collective, not about the individual, and it's all about taking pain, whether it's Bush taking away the pain of TARP from the banks, which destroys them in the end, or us giving giving trophies to kids in school. It's all about eliminating pain. You read your book, that's exactly the opposite of what we should be doing.
Yeah, I have this phrase I talk about a lot in the book called desirable difficulty. And this is this notion that we need to do a better job of distinguishing between the kinds of things that genuinely cause pain and suffering and the kinds of adversity that are necessary for growing stronger and learning. And we have confused these two categories. And it's time that we sat down and had a conversation about when we look at it. I have a chapter about how large should a class be, pointing out that when classes get too small, kids do worse. It's not a good idea to constantly try and put kids into smaller and smaller classes. There's a case where we have confused these two things. It's not a bad thing for your child to have to not have a constant 100% teacher's attention,
Yeah.
right? They've got to learn to figure things out by
Right.
themselves.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that little bit of difficulty.
Have you
in that
ever read
context.
Benjamin Franklin's letter to, Benjamin Franklin was the one who started the public hospital system. So he gave away his potbelly stove because he wanted to help people. So he's a compassionate guy. And he's writing to Parliament, and he said, your system is crippling people because you're giving them handouts. He said the best way to help people is to make them uncomfortable in their poverty.
Yeah.
So you help so much, but then at some point they've got to get up off of their own and start to do it.
Yeah.
That, you could never say that today.
Yeah.
You'd be a hate monger or everything else. If you don't want to take away all pain, then
Yeah, that's a difficult. It's a really hard conversation to have, and we're not in the mood for having difficult conversations. But this is what I'm trying to do with this book, is just to I want people to start thinking about, all right, there are certain kinds of adversity that can have a profoundly beneficial effect on character.
I think,
and I
would say that all adversity is, depending on how you internalize it. If you let it destroy you, then that's one thing, but it's your choice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Really fascinating. I'd love to talk to you again.
Thank you so much, Glenn.